Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On Tuesday, August 5th, welcome into the show. I am Cherry Gregg.
Double welcome.
I did a double. I'm switching it up.
Whoa.
Stunning Avi Wolfman-Arent over there.
I am Avi Wolfman-Arent, the aforementioned Avi Wolfman-Arent. Thanks for joining us today, folks. Today we are talking about history, American history, the story we tell about ourselves. Big anniversary coming up, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It'll be next summer. A lot of people will come to Philadelphia to learn about the country's history. If you go now to the various displays around Independence Mall, you'll hear about the Declaration, you'll hear about the Constitution, you'll also hear about slavery, the institution of slavery, and you'll read stories of enslaved people. The question is by next year whether you'll be able to read those stories, because the Trump administration is targeting many of those displays for potential removal by September 17th. I say potential, nothing's happened yet, but we wanted to take this moment to talk about history and that story we tell. Have we lost a shared understanding of American history? Have we ever had one? Chime in, give us a call, 888-477-9499. You can also email studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment in the chat.
And Avi, I will say I have so many questions because, in addition to being a beacon of freedom around the world, our American history is very complicated. It was downright bloody in some places and violent at times. And the same historical event could be viewed very differently depending upon who you ask. So the question is, how do you, put together a shared narrative of what American history really is? And so we have we're going to have that conversation today, and I have so many questions. And again, I hope that you join the conversation. Have we lost a shared understanding of American history, and have we ever had one? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. Yeah, so I look forward to hearing what our audience has to say today as well. Oh, yeah. Trio of news stories. I know. I got all serious.
Your turn there.
So the big story, New Jersey has reached a more than $2 billion settlement over PFAS, a.k.a. forever chemicals. That contamination in what state officials are calling the largest environmental settlement to ever won by a state. The settlement requires chemical company DuPont and related firms to pay $870 million over the next 25 years or so to settle claims. They also have to clean up contaminated sites and create a remediation fund of about $1.2 billion, or should I say up to $1.2 billion. And they have to put aside nearly $500 million just in case any of those companies go bankrupt during this process. So that's a pretty big deal and a lot of money. New Jersey Attorney General Matthew Platkin said the agreement brings to justice, quote, corporate polluters who for decades have knowingly contaminated our land and water with PFAS and other dangerous chemicals. Now, if you remember, we've talked about PFAS on WHYY quite extensively, thanks to our climate desk reporting. Zoe Reed reports a lot on this. And New Jersey has been very, very aggressive, winning a number of large settlements against chemical companies that polluted New Jersey. By the way, these forever chemicals found in just about everywhere, the water, the soil, and it's linked to cancer, it's linked to birth defects, so many things. And New Jersey is determined to clean it up.
Yeah, my takeaway was something you already mentioned, Cherry, which is that New Jersey, at least compared to other states, seems to have gone particularly aggressively after these companies. And so far, seems to have been successful.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of governments trying to get aggressive, very interesting story from Axios about Philadelphia's push to seize elevated train tracks once owned by the Reading Railroad Company and turn this space into an unusual public park. So the hope here, the idea, is to create an elevated half-mile rail park just north of Center City that's similar to the famous High Line in New York City. If you've ever been to Manhattan, been on the High Line. Now, part of this park already exists. I actually went there this weekend. It was built in 2018, but they can't build the full rail park because they're blocked by the company that owns much of the railroad viaduct. They're called Reading International, and the city and this company cannot agree to terms about the sale of the land. And so what Axios is reporting is that the city is attempting a runaround by appealing to a federal entity called the Surface Transportation Board. And with the STB's help, the city might be able to condemn the property and ultimately take ownership.
Yeah, this whole domain, like it's kind of like a form of eminent domain, but like a little different because they're trying to say that, this is causing blight and other things. And so they get to take over this piece of land. I think I have mixed emotions by this, because, it would be beautiful to get this park, I think. But then, the whole taking of land, I go back and forth in my head. But we'll see if they are able to do it. This park, they've been talking about this for so long. It feels like it's sort of stymied somewhere or got stuck someplace. And so it would be pretty nice. I know Atlanta, Georgia has a similar park and it's really beautiful and the things that they've done.
Yeah.
I would love to see that in Philadelphia.
Yeah, if you go there today, it does feel incomplete. It feels disappointing because it's truncated. It's just this little strip of elevated park. It's got a lot of potential. All evidence suggests that Reading International has zero plans to develop this land into anything productive. And so...
It's like, what's the holdup then? Why not just,
Well, to be clear-eyed about it, the holdup is that they want to get the highest price because they know the surrounding neighborhood cannot be fully developed until they get rid of this blight. What does that sound like to me? It's a ransom note.
Yeah.
It's extortion.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what it looks like from the outside. Basically saying, we know you can't build out this neighborhood until you get this little chunk of land. And we're going to make sure it stays ugly until you pay us what we want. I don't have any inside information. That's what it looks like from the outside. And so I think the city is finally saying, screw it.
All right. We're going to do what we need to do.
If you're not going to do anything with this land, we're going to get it condemned. It's difficult to do because it's a railway, and so that's why they're going to this federal authority. But to me, it looks a lot like corporate extortion.
Yeah, interesting.
And the whole neighborhood around it is suffering because there's nothing happening on this huge, very visible chunk of land.
Well, you made an argument that made me want to say, go Philly.
Well, I don't know what they're supposed to do. I mean, the company hasn't sold it. They can't agree on a price. This has been going on forever. And they've had so many opportunities to either sell it or do something with it.
And Philly,
it's not going to be a railway again. Everyone knows that, even if they make that argument. What, are they going to run a train right through a park?
They're not going to do it.
Come on.
Yeah. Interesting. Third story today is one that had me, pretty excited. A Philly rapper is going viral for creating Baldfest. It is a festival to celebrate, quote, the bald life, as well as, quote, the bald and the bald at heart. Look at that flyer. A bald man looking at himself and the bald head of another man. Yes. The idea.
Amazing. That's great art.
It's a great piece of art there.
Oh, radio doesn't do it justice. Radio does not do it justice.
See, that's why you got to watch on YouTube sometimes. The idea was born in the brain of conscious rapper Abstract Louvre, or it could be Love. He shaved his head for the very first time a couple months ago. Then he posted the idea on TikTok and got tens of thousands of views, with people promising in the comments to shave their noggins as well. Now, Baldfest is supposed to be free. There's going to be music. There's going to be beer. And get this, it is for the bald, but people with hair are welcome to come, but they'll be given a bald cap to wear.
Incredible.
Because they want them to be bald conscious, And I love this idea because my husband is a baldy.
Your husband?
My husband.
That's cute.
Yeah.
Nice.
He's been a baldy by choice since he was 18.
Threw in the by choice, by the way.
Threw in the by choice. Yes. And he works it. But, by the way, Avi, Abstract went online about an hour ago. He said the Baldfest is getting so big that he has to find a new venue. That's how many people want to come. It has blown up.
Let's make it an annual thing. We said, Made in America is not coming back to the Parkway. Let's put Baldfest on the Parkway. I think this could be international. I think this could be huge. Pitbull could headline.
Yes.
Common.
Oh my
LL
God.
Cool J. There's a lot of great
so
bald
many
artists.
baldies.
I mean, let's do this thing to the max.
And I would wear like a bald cap. Like I would it would be more like a bald beret because I would put it to the side because I have big hair. But like I would rock it just to be down with all the baldies.
Absolutely. So first, before we move on to our next segment, I did want to give you a chance to chime in on who would be on your Mount Rushmore of bald people.
So my Mount Rushmore would include Ving Rhames. Remember that Band-Aid on the back of his head when he played Marcellus Wallace? I have to have
No
him.
idea what you're talking about, but go ahead.
Yes, John Travolta. Yeah, I think he's a hot baldy. I would also have Lupita Nyong'o on
That's
there
a good
for
one.
women.
That's a good one.
As well as Sinead O'Connor.
Wow, 2 women. Look at you.
Yeah, I'm going to put the women on there
Look
because
at you.
it's a bold statement to be a bald woman.
All right, well, let me reveal mine. Mm-hmm. This is important. So here's my Mount Rushmore of bald people. Michael Jordan? Come on.
Yeah, he's an OG baldy.
Michael Jordan made bald cool.
He did. I get that.
I'm going with The Rock.
But you mentioned The Rock. I agree.
Dwayne Johnson, because you need someone to represent that sort of powerful, clean, bald look.
He's a good-looking bald.
George Costanza, because baldness can also be about inadequacy, and he really represents that. And I also put Sinead O'Connor on there because,
she made
why
the
not?
90s bald cute, really cool.
She really elevated bald
Women.
style.
Yeah, it did, for sure. We'll be right back.
They're
with
playing
the
us
serious
off.
conversation.
It
I know.
stinks. Welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Before the construction of the White House, American presidents lived in a mansion on the corner of 6th and Market Streets, right here in Philadelphia. Today, the site hosts an outdoor exhibit that mentions, among other things, the enslaved people who lived in the president's house.
But will that language still be there in a couple months? The Trump administration has set a September 17th deadline to remove what it calls, quote, inappropriate content from national park sites. And it is reviewing the President's House site and several others here in Philly that mention America's history of slavery.
And it is all part of a broader effort by the administration to eliminate historic displays that cast America in a, quote, negative light. We're going to discuss those efforts this hour and how the American government has generally tried to tell its own story.
First, let's bring in a guest who helped ensure that the President's House site included history about slavery and enslaved people. Michael Cord is an attorney, activist, and founding member of the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. Michael, welcome to Studio 2.
Thank you for having me. I hope you both are doing well.
Yes. And for our listeners at home and elsewhere, we invite you to join the conversation. Our questions of the day are this: have we lost a shared understanding of American history? And have we ever had one? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube, drop those comments in the live chat. And so, Michael, we wanted to jump right in and start with the controversy. When President Trump signed that executive order directing the removal of, quote, inappropriate history from national sites, and you discovered later that the President's House, an exhibit that you advocated for, was flagged, what was your reaction?
That's first of all a great question. The answer is I was surprised, but then again, not surprised. We kind of saw this coming. When it comes to the current president of the United States, nothing is surprising. So we knew from the executive orders that he signed on Inauguration Day. We knew from another executive order he signed back in March. And then we saw an order that was issued by his Interior Department chief. So we saw this coming. We weren't surprised.
Let's go back to the history of this historic site. How did it come together, and why did it end up including history about the enslaved people who lived there when George Washington was president? How did all of that come together? Take us back.
Another great question. I got a 3-hour answer. I got a 30-second
Give
answer.
us the 30 to
I think
45.
I give you
Yeah.
the 30 to 45 seconds. That's great. Here we go. Back in 2002, the Liberty Bell Center at 5th and Market, there was a plan by the federal government to move it a block away to 6th and Market. The reason is it was too cramped, too crowded, too congested. So they figured they'd move it a block west to 6th and Market. No big deal. The second thing that happened in 2002, it was discovered that that new site was in effect America's first White House. Back in 1790, it was called the President's House, the Executive Mansion, the Robert Morris Mansion. But under the Federal Residency Act of 1790, it served as America's first White House. Again, interesting, but no big deal. But the third thing that was discovered in 2002 is that that site, the President's House, America's first White House, is where George Washington held 9 black men, black women, and black children from among the 316 at his Mount Vernon, Virginia plantation. And this group that I founded, Attack, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, we said at this new site, it can't just be a monument to George Washington. It has to tell the historical truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
And did you get pushback on that?
Yeah. What was
That's another great question. The answer is no. And the reason that we didn't is this. Back then, from the Interior Department on the top level to the National Park Service to the local Independence National Historical Park, all three of those entities were run by and supported by legitimate historians. So even if they didn't really want to talk about that story, they welcomed it. And my group went in spoiling for a fight, but we really didn't get that fight. We got historians who said, hey, America's first White House, slavery, right here. The only quote-unquote fight might have been how expansive the story of slavery would have been. But they all conceded from day one the story would be told. It seems that they wanted at the beginning a big story about George Washington and a side story about slavery. We converted it into a big story about slavery and a side story about George Washington. But the historians, as part of the Interior Department, National Park Service, Independence National Historical Park, they all welcomed the story. It was just a matter of degree.
And by the way, 2002, that was a Republican president who was George W. Bush was in charge at the time. By the way, I want to read this email from Rob, who says, when I originally heard about the plans to shift the focus of the President's House project to slavery, I thought that was wrong to focus on the negatives, at least in that space. But it didn't condemn the country. It illuminated the invaluable contributions of enslaved people who had been written out of history. It made me more proud to be an American, not less. The real story of this country is so much richer and more inspiring than the sanitized American pageant myths many of us learned in school. And so I want to sort of push back again to you, Michael, a little bit, because there are folks who say, what's happening now with the Trump administration is simply conservative backlash to liberal-leaning removals of Confederate monuments or locally statues of Frank Rizzo, right? Or Christopher Columbus, those types of pushes. Can you talk, what do you say to those folks, and do you buy the equivalence?
No, I don't. It's interesting because there's certain things you can't have a counterpoint on. If somebody says, I oppose slavery, that's in a discussion. There's no debate. I oppose the Holocaust. No debate about that. I oppose apartheid. No debate about that. So to the extent that people have any opposition to, once again, telling the historical truth, nothing but the truth and everything about the truth, I'm kind of surprised by that. And in regard, for example, to, let's say, historical sites with the names of people who we know now were not great people, in fact, horrible people like Christopher Columbus. Well, let's tell the whole truth about that. I wrote a local newspaper column about this years ago, and I came up with something that I call subtraction by addition. And in a kind of tongue-in-cheek manner, I said, instead of tearing down the monuments of Columbus, for example, let's tell how he raped and robbed and pillaged. Instead of tearing down the monuments of, let's say, a Frank Rizzo, let's talk about how he strip-searched black men in broad daylight. So, and I gotta admit, that's kind of tongue-in-cheek because for the most part, with rare exception, I don't support the removal of historical racist monuments, but in some cases, I want to show how horrific and egregious their acts were. So again, for me, it's simply telling the whole truth, the what's good, what's bad, and what's ugly.
But you even said that when you were all conceiving of this site, the debate was about the mix. And I think for some people, that's still the debate, right? So this is a historic site in part because George Washington lived there. George Washington has an expansive legacy, and the question is, how much should you focus on his legacy as a slaveholder versus his legacy as chief executive? And some folks, I think today, probably still feel the site is out of balance, even though it does both. How would you respond to that criticism?
Well, first I would count to 10 so I wouldn't drop the F-bomb if somebody confronted me with that. Because again, when it comes to things as horrific as slavery and the Holocaust and apartheid, there's never too much of a story to be told. And when you talk about George Washington, there are more monuments to George Washington than any other character in American history. Here in America, more about George Washington than anything. But what about the story of the enslaved people? So if you want to talk about, for example, George Washington being a great general, talk about that. If you want to talk about George Washington being a great president, talk about that. But my question is this: can you be a great human being when you hold 316 fellow human beings in brutal bondage under slavery? So for me, it's not a balancing act. You talk to the folks who were enslaved, they would say, tell the whole story about us and forget about George Washington. So George Washington, a great American hero, but there's always got to be an asterisk. I mean, it's almost like, to me, like great baseball players who hit hundreds of home runs. Talk about that, but mention the steroids. Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and so let's come back to the present. You all, your group, your coalition of groups who've advocated for the president's house and other, monuments across the city are building up a resistance. What does that look like under this administration, and what is the plan going forward?
It looks like everybody and everything. When we held our rally this past Saturday, we called it a broad-based rainbow coalition, and we literally mean that. All races, all ethnic groups, all genders, all sex, everybody who's interested in America and American history. So a group of us, led by Roz McPherson and Reverend Dr. Mark Kelly Tyler and former city attorney Michelle Flamer, and myself and a few others, we came together to put the issue out there. So we have some ideas, we have some strategies, but we're going to slow walk. And by that, I mean, it's more of a chess game than a checkers game. So we're going to hold a few public meetings and bring people in and see what they think, and then we'll move forward. We have a political strategy that's tight. We have a legal strategy that's tight. We're just trying to build the army to push those strategies forward.
Well, Michael Cord, thank you so much for your time and illuminating this entire story. Michael Cord is an attorney, activist, and founding member of the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. Appreciate your time on Studio 2.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you both. And I got to say, I love this show, and you're both very cool. And I don't call people cool, but you both are very cool.
Thank you for that compliment.
Thank you.
Have a great day, Michael.
So I think we're going to expand this segment by about 5 minutes more than we were planning to, because we got a guest on the line. Wasn't exactly sure when the person was going to come in, and we're very happy to have him. I'll say as a setup, the debate over monuments and exhibits is not new around the country, even right here in Philadelphia. Trial attorney George Bocchetto is our next guest. He fought to preserve the Christopher Columbus statue in Marconi Plaza down in South Philly a few years ago, and he joins us now via phone. George, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
All right, so let's take folks back. This was in 2020. There was a move to take down this Columbus statue. You guys fought it in court, ultimately won, and then the statue, which had been boxed up, was unboxed. Explain to us why you were so passionate about this effort to save this particular statue.
Well, it really is rooted in two things. First, I believe the city has the right to take the statue down if they follow their own home rule charter and their own policies and procedures for how to do so. That's the government's right. However, they don't have a right to just go there in the middle of the night and hire a rigger and yank it out of there. That's not the way democracy works. That's not the way people's voices are silenced. So the primary reason I fought the removal of that statute is the city was completely ignoring its own policies and procedures on how to do so. Secondarily, there is a lot of misinformation out there on Columbus in particular. There's been a lot of scholarly works that have disputed some of the more populist type notions that he was this horrific enslaver and a horrific individual. And I think that, one of the things that should be emphasized with these statutes, and by the way, I know Michael Cord, he and I have been debating this issue for
I'm
decades,
sure.
it seems like. But, there are some bad features to all of these past public people. They all had their faults, they all had their problems, and I get it. But shouldn't that be a teaching moment rather than just a pretend it didn't happen moment?
Well,
Are we gonna rip down the statutes and pretend that Columbus never sailed?
Yeah.
Or are we going to present what were the situation at the time, what were the challenges, what were the mores, and explain how we have evolved since then into a much more tolerant society? To me, the teaching moment is very important.
And George, it almost sounds like you kind of have some agreement with Michael Cord, who says that the remedy to this is not to delete, but to add additional information. So, am I understanding your point of view?
If that's what Michael Cord is saying, and I've heard Michael Cord say a lot of things, and I respect him, and he's a smart guy, and he's passionate. But if that's what he's saying, I do agree with that part of what he's saying. We should not pretend that these things didn't happen. Did George Washington have hundreds of slaves? Unfortunately, yes, he did. Should we just pretend that never happened? No, I don't think so. I think we need to know about it and learn from it. But it doesn't mean you tear down every George Washington statue or you change the name of Washington, D.C. That's my point.
So then I guess you would have some disagreement then with the Trump administration, or what they seem to be attempting to do here, which is to remove mentions of slavery, and particularly they seem to be focusing on colonial figures and those colonial figures' attachment to the institution of slavery. Do you think they're going about this the wrong way?
Well, I think it has to be put in a context. Remember that, and just for example, in the George Washington situation, my understanding is that much of the lands that he had through his wife's inheritance.
Right. The Custis family, yes.
Yeah. And his wife inherited all of this, including the presence of slaves.
Yeah.
Now, what did George Washington do about it? I think that's worthy of illumination, and I don't think we should hide from it. But I do think that these things need to be put in the proper context of how they occurred, what the times were like at the time, etc. One of the things that, just to give you another example, many people just conclude that, well, the presence of a Columbus statue is an insult to indigenous people. Well, here's the problem with that. Indigenous people had slaves when Columbus arrived. You don't think that the Indian tribes that were in this country didn't have slaves? They did. And they enslaved other tribes.
So, but
slavery was
Yep.
a plague on all societies and cultures, not just Columbus.
Let me ask you before we have to transition, George, about what you feel is the resonance or the meaning of that Columbus statue to the Italian American community here in Philadelphia. You know, the history of Columbus Day stems from the horrific act of violence against a group of Italian American individuals in New Orleans in the 1800s.
Exactly right.
So give us a sense of what the symbol of Columbus means to the Italian American community here.
It means that we are important, we are appreciated. There's a recognition that there have been past sins committed, unfortunately, against Italians. And this is a way of redeeming the faith in the goodness of the Italian culture.
Yeah.
Just like when we put up Martin Luther King's statue in Washington, he wasn't a perfect man either. But
so
he did so much good, and we honor that.
Thank you so much. That's George Paquetto, attorney who fought to preserve the Christopher Columbus statue in South Philadelphia. George, thank you so much for your time today on Studio 2.
Pleasure. Give my regards to Michael Ford.
We will.
We'll be right back. This is Studio 2.
All right, welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. We've been talking about the growing controversy over the Trump administration's campaign to remove or revise exhibits in national parks and museums that they say, quote, divide Americans based on race. That includes displays about slavery at Independence Mall right here in Philadelphia. But conservatives are not the first to challenge America's historical narrative. So why does the pendulum seem to be swinging back and forth depending on which political party is in power? And could it impact America's identity?
Let's bring a historian into the conversation to help us parse through this aspect of the conversation. Julian Zelizer is a professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University. Julian, welcome back to Studio 2.
Thanks. It's nice to be with you.
It's great to have you. And for our listeners at home, come on in, join the conversation. Have we lost a shared understanding of American history? Have we ever had one? Call 888-477-9499. You can also email studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment in the chat.
Yeah, we wanted to start this part of the conversation off with a caller. We have Ellen from Chestnut Hill on the line. Ellen, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
My comment is, well, you say, have we lost? Many of us have lost a complete understanding of what happened. I'm a fifth-generation Southerner. I'm a native Texan. I came up here to the north to try to understand things like the Jim Crow I grew up in and other ways that both enslavement and genocide of indigenous people created our world here today. I've always wanted to help build a world like that, a better world. And when we know history, we can understand how the attitudes that created these horrors are still operating. So we need to understand history. We know that racism is still alive and well under Trump. He and his followers prove that. But we need every possible way to keep educating and re-educating ourselves and every upcoming generation to this history. So we need these exhibits. History that is not acknowledged and taught in a way that's too likely to repeat itself if we don't understand it. That leads to things like Trump's treatment of immigrants, for one example, all the other stuff he's getting away with.
Well, thank you so much. End of comment. Mic drop there from Ellen in Chestnut Hill. Thank you, Ellen.
Yes. And so, Professor Zelizer, I wanted to ask you, why does the narrative of history matter so much?
Well, it teaches us a lot about the complexities of ourselves as a nation. And so obviously it's important if you're talking about the American character to understand the different elements that made that, the conflicts that make what the United States is about. It's also a basis for trying to figure out where we go from here. I think it's an often, said, saying that we learn from history. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of history, and I think there's some truth to that. And so, for the past and the future and the current moment, I think we're just stronger if we are grappling with the history. I don't think it has to be a shared understanding of the past, but we have to be grappling with it and debating it and learning about it.
I think Gail agrees. Gail says all of our history has to be divulged, the good, the bad, and the ugly, lest the bad and the ugly risk being repeated. Mm-hmm. History is a collection of everything, not just the pleasant and happy things. I would like to distinguish, though, Julian, between history writ large and the history that a government presents to its people. Mm-hmm. How unusual is it for a government to sanitize its own past? Not just American government here, but talking about governments around the world. Is it remarkable or unremarkable what the Trump administration may be trying to do here?
Well, it's both. It's unremarkable in that there's often efforts by governments to either totally suppress our understanding of history or to manipulate it and shape it overseas. There's countless examples of how autocratic governments often make history their first target. They want to shape a narrative. There was a lot of work on Russia, for example, and how Putin was very focused on a certain story about the Soviet Union and Russia that connected to what he has been trying to do as leader. Here in the United States, in the Jim Crow South, there were very explicit programs to suppress what kind of education was given in the classroom about race relations and the history of Black America. And one of the first things that happens in Freedom Summer, which is a big civil rights push in 1964, is to set up what were called freedom schools, where Black students could actually learn about their history that had been left out of all the textbooks that Southern governments in Mississippi and other states were using. So unfortunately, we have seen this. This is a very aggressive push, though, by the federal government to take these kinds of measures and to go into parks and museums, and not to say universities and schools, and say what's patriotic, what's not, what's quote unquote disparaging, what's not. And so just because it's happened elsewhere and it's even happened here doesn't make this any less alarming.
And I wanted to sort of, ask you the same question that I asked Michael Cord earlier. Some people say this is simply conservative backlash to what, left-leaning liberals did a few years ago, sort of taking on Confederate, monuments and, adding, narratives about enslaved people, about Native Americans and all those things. What do you say to that this is simply a correction of the over-liberalization of history that happened a few years ago?
Well, the reality is this has been going on for much longer than 2020. This push in some conservative circles to be much more proactive and aggressive in how we understand our history dates back decades and decades. Some would say it was key in the 1950s during the Red Scare, and you had a lot of pressure on what should be taught, what might be socialist, what's dangerous in terms of the ideas. I just talked about the Jim Crow. So this goes back a long time, and even in our current moment, I mean, the culture wars over history are taking off, certainly by the 1990s. I just wrote a piece in Foreign Policy about a controversy at the Smithsonian in 1995, where an exhibit about the Enola Gay and the dropping the bomb on Hiroshima essentially was stopped because conservative groups and Republican politicians said it was unpatriotic and it disparaged veterans because it just had a display raising the questions in the debates. Was this the right step to do without answering it? But we've been seeing this for a long time. We saw it in the first Trump administration. So it wasn't a response to 2020. It's part of a much bigger continuum.
Yeah, and by the way, 80th anniversary of dropping the atom bomb on Hiroshima is tomorrow, I believe. And so that's a particularly apropos point. We have a lot of folks chiming in the comments. Allie says it's frightening that the government is beginning to remove facts about our collective story. This is an important harbinger of a fascist government. We must all be wary and take action to prevent it. Ruth says, it seems to me that if our report of American history is not honest and does not represent the diversity of people and events, it is not worth presenting. But Hal says an issue is that there is a significant number of Americans who see their mission in life to tear apart the country's history, and some of them get into responsible positions creating exhibits that focus entirely on the country's shortcomings. And that brings me to this question, Julian, which is, do all nations on some level need to tell, I don't know, little lies about themselves in order to create the idea of the nation? You know, there's sort of this idea that you almost have to create some positive vision of the past. Otherwise, there's really nothing that holds people together.
Well, certainly there's a function to myths and there's a function to stories about ourselves that are only loosely connected to the entirety of the nation. And we've seen politicians use this and activists have used it. And certainly there's a place for that. But that does not supplant the need for good history. And it does not kind of diminish the centrality of having actual rigorous debates once those are presented, grounded in research, grounded in artifacts, grounded in books, so that we have a realistic tale as well. I don't think most presentations are just seeking to disparage the United States. To have a display on slavery, for example, is just an integral part of what happened in this country and how it unfolded. And to kind of ignore that or forget that or act as if it didn't exist, for me, that's the least patriotic thing you can do, because you want to take the country seriously. So I think there's room for those, but it's only part of a conversation. There needs to be a lot of room for serious history.
And what do you see as the downside, I guess, of not telling those stories? And the example I always think of, because we were talking about World War II already, is it seems like the Germans have taken a very different approach to remembering what happened during World War II versus the Japanese. I mean, there is a great sense of national shame in Germany, is my understanding. In Japan, I think there's a little bit more distancing. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But what do you think would be lost if a country, I guess, took more of that latter approach of trying to at least not talk as much about the bad stuff?
Look, at the bad stuff is pretty important, and at the vaguest or the most abstract level, we just know a lot less. So we're walking around without actually understanding where we came from and who we are. But it has more direct implications. You can think of the current debates over immigration and the ferocity of the rhetoric being used. And so that has unfolded kind of in conjunction with debates over the border and deportation. But if you know the history of that rhetoric and you know how it could really unfold in incredibly dangerous ways in the 1920s, for example, a high point of nativism, then I think you will be much more cognizant and wary when you hear that again. Otherwise, you'll dismiss it. You'll say, oh, it's just words. Whatever happens with just words. So I think there's also those kinds of immediate implications. And with obviously, with war, if you study the mistakes we made, if you study Vietnam, you're going to be in a much better position, whether citizen or politician, to evaluate the next moment we're on the cusp of a conflict and to really think seriously before we're in it, what can go wrong and how to do it best. So studying the past can lead to better outcomes now.
Yeah. And let me read a couple comments. We have Maura who emailed and said, we've had triumphs and downfalls in molding this very young country, and we should tell them all factually. Greg from Philadelphia says, U.S. history involves rape, murder, pillage, and theft of land from its native people. Economic prosperity was built on the backs of slaves and indentured servants. They're trying to erase the evil foundations to justify a savior mentality and misrepresent what actually happened. Robert from Center City is on the line, and he has a perspective. Robert, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
My comment is that whenever I hear these discussions about statues being removed and put into storage, it makes me laugh because I'm a retired art historian, and this is literally as old as the hills. It was a very common practice in ancient Egypt when a pharaoh, let's say Akhenaten, was out of favor, that they went and they deliberately destroyed or defaced or reinscribed his monuments. In ancient Rome, there was a formal senatorial process where they damned the memory of the emperor or political figure who fell out of favor. And again, they defaced the monuments or put new heads on the monuments so somebody like Nero or Caligula would be expunged from public memory.
Yeah.
And finally, I just wanted to point out that the Frank Rizzo statue that we had here was removed for these political reasons. And that sort of gets back to the ancient Roman connection, because that statue with the raised right arm was a direct quote of a famous Roman statue of Emperor Augustus called the Prima Porta Augustus. So all of this stuff has been going on for centuries, and that, I don't think it's ever going to get resolved.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's Robert from Center City. Julian, my question for you is this. As a historian, is there a method of sort of going through history and creating a narrative that is more fair and less political? And what does that method actually look like when you try to put together a historical narrative that includes the perspective of people as diverse as those in America?
Well, look, two things are very important when you're writing history, for sure. One is that you are guided by the data. So whether it's the archives, the oral history, the artifacts, you have to let that shape your story rather than having a story and then approaching the material so it fits what you wanted to say. That's extremely pertinent, I think. And second is a kind of psychological approach where you are open to letting the story take you in different directions than you expected. I think if you kind of stick to those two and you do good work, then you can kind of come up with something that might be controversial, that might be different than what other historians have said, but it's sound and solid. But I do think, look, my perspective is we should push ourselves to study as many voices as possible, as much of the American experience as possible, and really to keep broadening our canvas rather than to narrowing it, because then we end up with just a better understanding of the country, a country many of us love, but you can love a country that's incredibly flawed and has done problematic things. So that's kind of my metric. Monuments are a little different.
I wanted to ask about that distinction because we started talking about exhibits, but we've mentioned the removal of monuments. You could also throw in naming a street after someone or a prominent building. Do you categorically view that as different, and would you use different criteria for that versus, what should be included in an exhibit?
It is a little different. They're usually in public spaces, and so different people are approaching those spaces, whether it's a name or a statue, and it's going to kind of evoke certain feelings. I think a lot of those statues were put up for political reasons. Yeah. So there was a lot of work on the Confederate statues were literally a protest against civil rights. So we shouldn't treat them as sacrosanct. And there's room to debate. Maybe some should be moved.
So the reason why the monument was put up, you think matters in terms of evaluating whether it should remain?
I think it matters. At least we should remember these haven't been in kind of the ground since the founding of the country. So there's room to at least consider maybe some could be removed and maybe some should stay in place. Some of it matters. How do they, what's their meaning today to people? And I think that's relevant. I don't have an easy solution on that one. I'm much more comfortable with how do you write and teach the history. But I do see the legitimacy of these debates, and I think they are important to have. And we've seen some of these removed, and life moves on. They can be replaced with others that are more relevant to our time. So we could be a little more, I think, flexible and at the same time judicious in thinking through some of the monuments that have become a source of controversy.
I want to bring in another caller. I think we can get them in before the show ends. We have John from Plymouth Meeting on the line. John, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment? And try to keep it brief.
I will keep it really brief. If you read Hamilton by Ron Chernow, you would understand that Hamilton in particular, but all of our founding fathers, actually knew history extremely well, dating back thousands of years. They started to learn that when they were 14 or 15 years old. And that's the reason the foundational elements of this country are so strong, because they knew the mistakes other civilizations had made from thousands of years. So those foundational elements are what props this country up. And if we detour from that, we were going to have serious issues. In addition, I'd like to just challenge all of the media, including this program.
Bring it on.
And you got to wrap it up. Yep.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
It's the atomic bomb. So I apologize for the segue into that. But the small words are important, and we need to give a demonstration for our young people, A and the to the to be. But sorry about that. The point is Hamilton knew, and that's why he was able to craft this country the way it is now.
All right,
Thank you so much. Great comment, great call from John in Plymouth Meeting. And I know you were nodding along, Julian.
It's actually a very good point. All the history of the founders, who are so revered actually by conservatives. There were historians like Bernard Bailyn and Gordon Wood who wrote about the founding. And one of their main arguments was the founders were constantly thinking themselves still as English, were thinking of all the problems with their political system and all the abuses of monarchical power and of corruption. And so they were very open to the flaws, and that leads them to create a new nation and to create our Constitution. So it's not just Hamilton. It's literally the founding fathers were seeped in problematic history, and that became the basis for the system that is so venerated today. And it's a good thing to remember when people start warning about disparaging the country. That's what our founders did, and the product was a country that many people see as kind of contributing a lot to the history of democracy, even with all the deep problems and flaws.
And Julian, as we wrap up, nothing has happened yet. The Trump administration hasn't erased or eliminated the history. But what will you be looking for as these decisions are made and as September 17th gets closer?
Well, I'm less interested in what the administration does than what everyone else does. Do they kind of become accepting of this, or do teachers, students, professors, general interest readers, museum curators stand their ground and continue to present the history and insist without any reservation that we have to be honest and we have to be vigorous and we have to continue to have these historical debates regardless of what the administration is trying to do? That's what I'm watching for. And I hope there's no change in a kind of defiant attitude about education.
Yeah. Well, I think this hour we had a vigorous conversation.
At
the very least, Julian Zelizer is professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University. Thanks for joining us, as always, on Studio 2.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everybody who called in and emailed in. Lots of different perspectives.
Yeah, Susan says, get rid of the Columbus statue, put up Da Vinci.
Oh,
She says she's half Italian, and that would be her prescription.
All right. Everybody has a point of view. And I want to say thank you to our producers, Debbie Builder, Paige Murray Bessler, and Andreas Copes. Thanks to Mike Schiffler, our visual producer, the sexiest bald man in America, the one and only Al Banks, engineered today's show alongside Tina Calicay. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory from Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia. I'm Cherry Gregg. I don't know who wrote that copy, but I agree.
I slipped that
in.
I
agree.
I slipped that in. I'm Avi Wolfman. Thanks for being here. Oh, boy. Coming up tomorrow, we're talking about the gerrymandering fight spilling out of Texas as Republican lawmakers try to redraw congressional district lines. It's starting a redistricting arms race with Democratic governors in California, New York, and Illinois now threatening to redraw their state maps in retaliation.
So we'll talk about these efforts to redraw maps ahead of the midterms and what this means for voters and our democracy. But coming up next on WHYY, it's Here and Now.